So we're here, Gothenburg, Nebraska. We are at Wild Horse Golf Club. It is a Dave Axland, Dan Proctor design. It opened in 1998. I think most people would know this golf course, Wild Horse, as one of the very best value golf courses in the country. But I think that the discussion needs to be, it's one of the very best golf courses in the country.
Right, it has a low green fee and it gets praised for being a good course while having a low green fee. But I think that if you put it up against pretty much any other public course in the country, that there's no reason to think that it doesn't stack up really, really well.
Yeah, and when we say public golf course, this includes resorts, it includes, Pebble Beach is like Pebble Beach in its current state, Wild Horse in its current state. You obviously have the spectacular views and the history of Pebble Beach, but when you get down to the soup and nuts of the golf courses at each site, I think this golf course stacks up pretty well with a place like Pebble Beach even.
Right, and we can talk about why that is a little bit later on, but maybe we should tell people who Dave Axland and Dan Proctor are. So what's like the origin story of the design of this golf course?
Yeah, for sure. So Dave and Dan have worked for Bill and Ben, Bill Core, Ben Crenshaw for years. And the origin of this golf course was that obviously Sandhills down the road. Sandhills is what people know about Nebraska Sandhills golf. And this community, Gothenburg, was looking to build a golf course. And from what I understand, they had been looking at a series of architects, and someone from the Sandhills called them and said, if you don't hire these guys, you're crazy. And they built this on an extremely small budget. It is a 3,300 person town here. It's a farm town, mostly it's some cattle, some corn. It's a very blue collar town in Nebraska. It's your typical farm town, but it has a world-class golf course in it now because they hired, two guys that have built some of the greatest golf courses and some of the best modern courses in the world.
And it gets used a lot, right?
Yeah.
This course is really busy with local players. It's not just like traveling people who are coming to this golf course. But Gothenburg, it is a small town compared to, like a metropolis, but, this is not a small town like Mullen, which is the town near Sandhills Golf Club. It's along the I-80 corridor in Nebraska. So, there are some bigger towns along this highway, and that's kind of where it is. So it's actually pretty easily accessible compared to a lot of Sandhills courses where you have to go quite a ways out of your way. It's in a way, it's like an entryway to the Sandhills.
Exactly. It's at the very southeast corner of the Sandhills, about the southeast corner. The way the Sandhills kind of work, it's an oblong shape, but it's very much the gateway. It's 4 hours from Omaha, right. About roughly 4 hours, depending on how fast you drive. You could probably get here a little bit quicker, but with it is at the very kind of base of the Sandhills. It's an interesting place. One of the cool things about the Sandhills is they just kind of rise up out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And here, you're sitting at the very base of the Sandhills. And, just to the south of it, it is flat farmland.
Yeah, it's prairie, basically. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the Sandhills kind of rise out. And this is at the very start of the Sandhills. As you get deeper into the Sandhills, at a place like Sandhills Golf Club, they get much more dramatic. They're bigger Sandhills. This has a much more subtle, feel to it. It doesn't have as much big land movement. There are parts of this course that have some dramatic movement, but nothing in comparison to Sandhills. And one of the things I think about that is that smaller movement actually yields much better everyday play because it's more walkable, it's just more enjoyable. It's not as much of a, I think the dramatics of the big Sandhills are, a sight to behold. But this is really great golfing ground if you're playing every day because you're not having to always conquer these big tasks.
Yeah, you can sort of envision this as a mixture of prairie and dunesland, what you have at Wild Horse. If you were just building a golf course that everyone was going to walk, not that everyone walks this golf course, but say this was a pre-golf cart kind of course, this would be a great site to pick because it's so easy to get across it and yet there's enough interesting stuff going on in the land so that you have a great golf course.
One of the things I find fascinating is the way the flatter holes really work. And there you see a lot more focus on orientation of greens and hazards. You know, your kind of classic strategy holes where, you know, a green is set at a harder angle than, you know, the holes that traverse, you know, a little bit more interesting land that the land can do a lot of the heavy lifting. With those flatter holes, I'm thinking really, you know, a great example is the 7th, where you have a short par 4 with a centerline bunker, a very wide fairway, but the way the green is set at a very hard angle from left to right with a big bunker in front, it really drives some strategy back. And you can hit a wide number of shots off the tee. Where the pin is going to dictate so much of where you want to be. You know, being on that left side, if the pin's on the left, makes for a very, very tough second shot. But if it's over on the right, it's not a bad spot to be. But being up that right side really opens up the green. And the one thing there, though, is you have to deal with the wooga. What they call their kind of prairie grass is the local term.
This is the native grass. They call it gunship prairie dunes, but we discovered that it's called wooga here.
They said that's the worst word they could think of without it being a profanity. Yeah. So you have to deal with that on the right side. So there is a risk when you push it right. It kind of that wooga cuts in on the right and makes it a little bit more difficult place to get to. But then the green really opens up. So they did that there. Another really good example of that is the 15th hole, another short par 4 with a hard angle. This one's kind of like a mirror. And there you have to play a little bit up the left there. The ideal angle is the left, and you have to play over bunkers to get there. And so it's a different hole. The orientation of the green flips, and then the hazards that you deal with kind of are different. So, but those two holes really kind of cement how they used that flat land and made it really compelling was with hazards and orientation of green.
And the 3rd hole is also an example of a hole on relatively flat land, but there's enough undulation in the land so that the design can use it to do some interesting things. So in this case, the 3rd hole kind of shares a fairway with the 2nd hole. So it's this big wide fairway that's broken up by 3 bunkers. If you hit your drive up the left, then that kind of opens up the right side of the hole for you, but it makes it hard to reach the green in 2. If you let your drive hug the right side of the hole, then you have a better chance of reaching the green in 2. But then if you play the 3rd hole as a 3-shot hole, there's another set of challenges that comes with that, because you can either go to the right side for a layup, or you can go to the left side for a layup. But the left side is blind. So if you want to go to that left side, and the green really does open up nicely from there, especially if the pin is on the left, then you have to hit your 2nd shot to a blind landing area, which is really uncomfortable because all you see over there is like a couple of bunkers, and then beyond that, the wooga, right? So you just have to trust that expansive fairway is there, and it is. It's like pretty wide over there. So there's just like a little bit of discomfort that comes with playing that hole in a strategic way over 3 shots.
I think you hit on a big theme of the golf course, and it's one you talked about a lot while we were out there, is the idea, the way they obscure areas and they create this blindness. There are a lot of semi-blind shots where you see a ribbon of fairway, but almost concealed behind oftentimes small dunes, sometimes bunkers, are other areas that you can't see that provide you with a big advantage in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of visual deception, but also visual help out there, right? Various things are done to either kind of show you where you can play or conceal from you where you're supposed to play. I think a good example of this is the 8th hole, right? This is a big par 4, and the main feature of the hole is a massive blowout. This is like a Sandhills golf club style blowout, which you don't see all over the place at Wild Horse, but there are a few places where they could do it. So that kind of dominates your field of vision off the tee, but it's so far off the tee that it's not in play for most players. Might be in play for some PGA Tour pros, but it's pretty far out there. So you're probably not reaching it if you're hitting towards it. And there's a lot of fairway out there, so it's kind of an attractive place to hit your tee shot.
Especially with the wooga. You don't want to get in the wooga.
You don't want to get in the wooga. The wooga's to the right, right? That's the main trouble. That's what you're really playing away from. But if you play your tee shot toward that big blowout bunker, on your next shot, you're going to be blind because the edge of that bunker is your horizon essentially, right? There's nothing beyond that that gives you a visual cue as to where the green is, much less the pin. And so you really don't know where you're going. So if you hug the right side alongside the wooga, then you'll have a much better view into the green, a better angle to get there. And it's a long second shot, so you want to take whatever advantage you can get there.
I found myself, I had a really good day with my irons, but it was interesting. I found myself over there on the left, and I was completely blind. I thought I would be able to see the grain silo, the Gothenburg grain silo, but I still couldn't. All I could see was bunker. I walked up to get a line of sight, but you're walking up, it's always one of those disconcerting moments when you're walking up and then you come back and I couldn't see I couldn't see anything. I had my spot, but I didn't really trust it. And then I hit probably the worst iron shot of the day just because there's something in your head about not feeling comfortable about the shot. So, it's a great hole. That is, and I think one of the cool things about that is into the green, it runs hard from left to right. So if you're on that right side, the ball really bounces in if you pull it a little bit and it'll just funnel right into the green, and it's a long shot, as you said. So you wanna land that kind of short left and let it bounce in depending on where the pin is. I think the greens here, one of the things I felt like when I was, playing the course for a second time is that this golf course is really, it feels very Perry Maxwell. It feels like, if you were gonna say, what's a modern representation of Perry Maxwell's work, this is it. There's very little earth movement that they did. Part of that's budget, but part of that's a great piece of ground. But then when you get to the greens, they just feel very Prairie Dunesy. You have a lot of those Maxwell-like rolls. We could call them, Axland and AP rolls here, Axland and Proctor rolls, but they sit on the ground. Very few of them are built up. They're all, they sit in these beautiful pockets. Some of them are in pockets, some of them are on dunes. The green sites are tremendous and they require very little earthwork around them. And that allowed them to put kind of their touches on the centers of the greens. And that's where they put these Maxwell rolls, which we've talked about in other videos. But it's not like a tier, it's more of like a pimple, or like as Dunlop White at Old Town calls it, a muffin top in the green. Right. And it creates just such wonderful greens because they're simple in nature, but very, very complex in order to navigate them, putt over them, and also understand how you can use them to funnel balls in towards holes and avoid them funneling them away from them.
Right. Yeah, and I want to emphasize the point that you brought up earlier about the greens, how they sit naturally at grade. As in, they aren't draining these greens by building up the sides of the greens and letting the water drain off the side to the natural grade of the land. Instead, these greens sit right on the land and they drain in different ways. A lot of these greens have big tilts, and that's another similarity with Prairie Dunes, where the greens that are on the most severe parts of that site are tilted in a big way, and then they have subtle internal contours to make things interesting when you're on the green or to create some strategy back to the tee. But the major challenge is often that tilt of the green that goes with the landscape and naturally drains the water off the green with the land. And so that's what a lot of these greens do at this course. The third green does that. I think that the 12th green does that beautifully at Wild Horse. It just sits there on the land and kind of flows naturally with it. The 16th green is another example. That green is a little more pushed up, but it's on a natural rise and it just kind of moves with it. And it has big tilts in it, and but it doesn't look like it has been placed there on the landscape. It looks like it's just sort of emerging out of the natural undulations.
That's an amazing hole here. It might be, if you were going to create a list of like the greatest holes at Wild Horse, the 16th would be near the top of my list, maybe at the top, but it is a big par 4. It plays in the summer into prevailing wind. And I think one of the things you get on the back nine at Wild Horse is a really good cadence of gettable holes and really difficult holes, like almost through the entire back nine, where you have to really hit great shots to make pars, but then on the holes that play downwind, and there are a couple reachable par 5s, there are some short par 4s where you can make birdies with good shots. Right. But 16 is one of those stout par 4s, it's a long hole, and then you get to this green, you're hitting up to this great green. It's a majestic green, and if that green was flat, just sitting on the dune with like the grade of that dune, it would be a great green and a great hole. But then there are a couple bumps in it, those Maxwell rolls that create these defined sections. The front area is really difficult. The back right over a big bunker is extremely difficult to get to. But, it just makes that hole, really, you could put that hole in any major championship setting and it would be a stout finishing hole. And coming down the stretch here, that 16th hole is one that you really remember.
Yeah, you mentioned the mixture of gettable holes and really hard holes. I really like how down the stretch at this course, but also basically throughout the course, you don't have holes that are just kind of medium, right, difficulty. There are holes that are just kind of on the edge of par, right? A lot of par 4.5s, a lot of par 3.5s. And so you always feel like you're stretching for something, whether it's for a birdie or whether you're thinking it's going to be hard to make par on this hole. If I make par, that feels like a birdie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like one of the things when this is a golf course that lends itself so well to playing it multiple times. Don't run off to go play somewhere else. Like this is a place that you want to hub in, because the more you play it, the more pins you see, the more you're going to understand these golf holes, and it kind of reveals itself with more and more plays. And speaking of that, one of my favorite holes out here is another one of the par 5s. I think the par 5s are really excellent here, but the 6th hole on the front nine. And this is a bunkerless hole, and it just shows how much you can do with just the natural contour when you have great ground like here. And this hole kind of serpentines through dunes. And off the tee, you get that obscured look. You want to hug the right side. And when you hug the right side, you get a bigger bounce. You cut off some of the dune. And then you have a second shot. Again, depending on where you are in the fairway, maybe an obscured look. It looks way narrower than it is. It's a huge area. And then you get to the green, and the green is truly phenomenal. It kind of benches in off the right dune that it sits in, and has severe right to left slope, but the back half of it, you can't tell, it's part of this deception. You can't tell that green actually runs away in the back half. It is a beautiful par 5 and not one bunker on it, which is just, just using the natural contour to create a world-class golf hole.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of bunkers at this course. I mean, there's 60-something bunkers, which is quite a few for a public course, but it never feels like any of the holes are over-bunkered. And in some cases, like the 6th hole, they saw that they didn't need any bunkers, so Axland and Proctor didn't put any bunkers in. It was unnecessary. And then on other holes, there's 1 or 2 bunkers that have a huge influence on play, whether it's for visual reasons, like we described earlier with the 8th hole, or strategic reasons. There are a lot of bunkers on this course that are right where you want to put your ball. Good example is the 5th hole. That's a short par 4. The temptation is to really push it up near the green on the left. So you have a nice angle into that green around a dune that sits there on the right side. And so you want to be on that left side up near the green as much as possible. Well, guess what? There's a bunker sitting right there, right in the perfect spot where the aggressive line to the hole is. And you could play away from that bunker if you'd like. There's plenty of room to the right, but the more you go right, the more the ball is going to be above your feet on the approach. and that's going to push you more and more left away from the pins and with the slope of the green. So it's going to be tough to get the ball close. So yeah, you really want to be on the left on that hole, but if you're going to be on the left, you're going to have to challenge that bunker that's right in that perfect spot. So basically there's one bunker and a dune on that hole, and it creates all of that fun.
The whole puzzle of this golf course is just tremendous, and it's a course in terms of a public golfer, and really any golfer, that you really should try and seek out to play. Like, it's in the two hands, but it might be in the very 5 best public golf courses, like in terms of where I really want to go. It doesn't have the views, and I think that's what it is. It's pretty in its own right, though. This is one of the most beautiful parts of the country. And I think the way it's presented, the agronomy, Josh Maher does an incredible job here. The agronomy is off the charts. It is some of the best turf you'll find. And the green complexes are great. Like, the greens are in great shape, but also they're incredible greens. So I think it just really centers around where it is. It's hard, not a ton of people have been here. The architects are less known. Like, if this was built by Tom Doak, if this was built by Gil Hance, if this was built by Corin Crenshaw, everybody would rave about it. Everybody would be talking about it all the time, but it wasn't. It was built by 2 guys that, outside of very small architecture circles, people don't know. And that, with how remote it is from, big population centers, and I think those 2 things, with the lack of a body of water, keep it out of being really highly rated. But if you're looking at the pure golf course experience, there aren't many better.